Hey, my name is Jacob Ganos. I've been working in Unity for about 5 to 6 years as a hobbyist, and I have released only one game from a 48-hour game jam. We all have probably been there where we go in and we have started to learn some type of game development because we have that dream game that we want to do. Then we can begin to realize that, well, game development is hard, and it is. This is kind of the same thing that happened to me. So this isn't my story about me making my dream game. This is my story about a stepping stone. And for me, the stepping stone is overcoming my problem with not completing projects. And so today I'm trying to make this video as kind of a dedication or reminder to myself of how far I've come and to share a little bit of progress in how I did some game dev stuff. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is in the game. The game itself does not have a name yet, but basically the inspiration for it started off with wanting to make a horror game. I feel like a lot of new people, when they first start making games, especially in Unity and other game engines that are very easy to pick up and start with, they always kind of go towards that horror. And I've always loved the idea of creating a horror game. I wanted to make something kind of bad. I know that sounds odd, but I don't expect it to be perfect. What I really want is an AI that has basically a suspicion meter, where whenever you are noticed or you do something out of the ordinary, or maybe you move an object, keep a door open, and the AI notices this, it gets more suspicious of your existence. I guess I should have started by saying you're a person and you are locked in a basement. What you need to do is escape from the basement, but you're locked inside this psycho's house. So you get out from the basement and you go to the front door and you learn that there are 3 locks that are locking you into the house now. Okay, so imagine, if you will, while we're kind of going over this, just imagine that these right here are different rooms, right? So we have, room A, B, C, and D, and then this is a hallway, so I'll put that as H. And every time that a person walks into a room, there's a counter that goes up. So let's say that this person's been in this room once, he's been in this room twice, this room once, and these times 0. This information will be collected onto basically what the player is doing. How many times do they tend to go into this room? What are the paths that they typically take to go from point A to point B based off the rooms that they've been in? The biggest thing is assets. For me, I am not an artist. Not 2D, not 3D, none of it. So for me, I am very limited in the amount of assets that I can use. This entire project has been done with free Unity store or itch.io assets that were completely free. And you'll get to see, kind of in the start of this, that I am going ahead and kind of demoing some assets. I'm checking some things out, kind of looking over, a couple different random pieces. The next thing that I worked on is a character controller. I mean, how do you play a game if there is nothing to control? So for me, for this project, I had 2 things in mind. The first was, well, if it's going to be horror, the person needs to hide. And so for me, it was imperative that a character be able to crouch and hide or do some type of hiding mechanic. And then the next thing was basically your basic movement. I mean, camera movement. It was going to be done first person. I've always had my mind set on it being first person. Third person is possible, but then again, there is that limitation of assets, so I stuck with first person here. The next thing is the killer model itself. I'm going to briefly touch on this. For me, I spent a lot of time in the store assets looking for a killer model, something that would be scary. Obviously, the model itself doesn't have to be very, very scary, but it has to be unsettling, unnerving. We'll come back to that later because I never actually did find a good model right off the bat. Whenever I first started, it did take a good couple days of research. Next, I started to work on hiding. And the main mechanic for hiding for me was some big furniture that the character could hide in. I did settle on the wardrobe, and at first I had decided that this is going to be kind of a free open thing where the character would open the door, walk into the closet, and then close the door. You will see later that perspective changed. As you might be seeing right now, the character was peeking, or able to peek open the doors and wiggle around and look. And at first that felt really good to go ahead and to make it so that the person could kind of wiggle around and look through this little crack in the room. But eventually I did learn that this is kind of a bad idea. And you'll see later, I changed this to be static, that the person instantly gets in and they instantly are locked into one position and they can't move. They can just peek out a little bit and kind of see, but they can't move around freely. I was then creating a test environment for my project. I wanted to set up an environment where I could put the killer together, where I could put together basically an environment to see how things are working, if they're scary, if they're not. So this is me kind of building a very short, very quick test environment. And then the next part is for me to set up the nav mesh agent. Pathfinding is not something that I really want to get into. I was trying to manage the scope to be a little bit lower, so we just used the regular nav mesh agent that's built into Unity 3D. And you should see that this actually correlates to the killer state machine. The killer itself is basically designed around a regular state machine. I looked at behavioral trees and a couple other options, but to me those seemed a little bit more than they needed to be, especially the killer state machine, or especially for a killer. For right now, the killer is able to walk around, go do tasks, which you can see look like little stoves right now. I like to think he's making some macaroni and cheese or something. Unfortunately, he is not making macaroni and cheese in the final product, but at least that I don't think he will. Maybe he will, I don't know. But he walks around, and the way that it works right now is it just randomly grabs a task. It grabs the position that he should stand at near that task, and he goes there. And he does the task for X amount of time, and then he gets the next task. Poor guy is constantly working. Obviously, it's not very scary if there's no doors, if you can see the killer all the time. I wanted it to be kind of a way that the person could be kind of scared. And on top of that, in my previous explanation, I talked about this suspicion meter and being able to build suspicion. What you will notice is that this killer always closes his door. When he walks through a door, it always closes behind him. So that being said, if a door was left open, the killer will notice that and it will increase his suspicion. This is one of those few ways that the killer's suspicion can be increased. So what are we doing with that suspicion? How are we tracking it? How are we working with anything? The next part of the system I built was rooms and the room manager. And the whole manager itself has an account of statistics that were taken from how the player plays. When the character enters a room, it tracks that. It says the player has visited this room once. When the player gets into a hiding spot, it says, okay, the player has hidden this spot once. When the player is in a room, we can query that room to find all of the doors. This is kind of important because I want to, depending on the suspicion and the stats, this killer is supposed to be smart. He doesn't just run towards the player all the time. This killer can see the player in a room and decide, okay, I'm near the only exit. So why would he go away from that exit to give the player the opportunity to leave? That is potentially an option in the future, is to have the killer be smart enough that if the player makes a mistake and goes in a room with only one exit, that's it. They don't get the opportunity to come back. Another area that I wanted to have suspicion built was on the idea of bottles. Usually when the character is running around or doing something, the bottles on the floor or something on the floor they could knock over, which would make a sound. Or if the killer didn't hear the bottle fall over somehow, the killer could notice that the bottle has moved, has been tipped over, has been knocked out of the way, etc. And so bottles themselves actually have a very unique kind of way of being handled. Bottles, the way that I set it up is that when the player or the killer sees them, it spawns basically a ghost bottle, or in this situation, it's just an invisible object with a collider. And it'll persist for however long the killer's memory is. I think in this situation, it's 60 seconds. And if he revisits that bottle and the ghost is still active, so he remembers it being there, he will then do a trace to the bottle, or kind of a check to see if the bottle itself and the ghost of the bottle, or the memory of the bottle, are the same in the same spot, or at least close to the same spot. So there is a possibility that the player can hit the bottle and move it, but just a little too little for the killer to notice. And I'm kind of making this a situation where, okay, would a person or a killer really see a bottle move maybe a few centimeters? And then the next part is I found a killer model. It took a couple days and it took me a while, but the killer model is this little pig guy. And the pig guy, he's himself, you can see in this next clip, it's very dark, it's very kind of getting towards a finished product. And you can see there is no animation yet. He is detecting the player though, and he can chase the player, and he can't kill the player yet, but he can chase him, and the player can run away from him. And so now we kind of have that interaction. Obviously there's still very much to do with that AI at this point. So this is what we're kind of looking at. This is getting us to that next step. And so from here, you'll begin to see much less progress being documented. See, this is where the idea of scope kind of comes into play. I had kind of started to fall off working on the project. Didn't really know if I was going to finish it. I wasn't sure if it was going to be fun, if there's something I wanted to do. But in this time, I did work on the project. I got animations up. I started looking through some new models, especially for corpses. I wanted to get there to be, bloody corpses and stuff like that. And I did find some models for it on itch.io that were free. And I started working on a final level design rather than working on this test area. One of the areas that I'm also very proud of is my car/intro sequence. You probably won't get a chance to see that in this video yet, but there is an intro sequence to the game that has been done and is ready to kind of be implemented. I worked on audio, one area that I don't know very well, but audio itself has quite a few intricate pieces to it that I didn't even think I would get into. And then of course, working towards that end goal, I put in keys and locks. For as far as this, this project goes for me, I said this was a stepping stone. And for me, this stepping stone explicitly points to finishing things I started. So I'm making this video to hold myself accountable and to push through to make sure that I can show the progress I've made and not give up on it. I've documented the steps early on in this process, and I realized that this actually is a great motivator to keep going. So I would highly recommend you, take a look at your projects. When you start one, grab a little bit of, your ideas on recording of how you're thinking it should be done. Record you working on it a little bit, and then compare it every time that you feel a little discouraged. Compare it back to that old project to see, does it hold up? Have I made progress? And I'm sure you will. For as far as my project goes, I'm hoping in the future to have either another devlog at least released, or by the time that the project hits 1 year old, I would like to have a playable version that I can let people get their hands on and play with. I really am not sure where I'm going to put this game, if it's going to be on Steam or itch.io, but if it does come out, of course you'll see something on here, and I will hopefully see you next time. For now, I'm going to leave you with a small little clip that shows kind of where I'm at now with some of the stuff that I did over that time skip, over that time that I didn't record stuff. So I hope you enjoy.